This edition of Monocle on Saturday was first broadcast on the 15th of November 2025. Hello there, it's Emma Nelson here, coming to you live from Midori House in London. This is Monocle on Saturday. And coming up on today's programme, we'll be looking at the week's news and culture. The Russia analyst and author Charles Hecker is here. Good morning, Charles. What have you spotted?
Good morning, Emma. We will have our usual roundup of interesting things emanating from the White House, but then we're going to look at a development of a floating city in the Maldives.
Can't wait. Then,
when we're in performance mode and you've done all the prep, the beginning of each scene is really important for my scene partner to give her the different energy that she needs for that new character.
the actor Jamie Rose Monk will be talking to Georgina Godwin about crafting different characters and being an actor in 2025. That's all coming up on Monocle on Saturday. First, though, a look at the news. The US President Donald Trump has said he will sue the BBC for up to $5 billion after his speech on January the 6th, 2021 was edited by the corporation to change the meaning of his words. The BBC has apologised but has said it will not pay Mr Trump compensation. Switzerland and the US have reached a trade deal which will reduce tariffs on Swiss imports from 39% to 15%. That's the same as the US arrangement with Switzerland's EU neighbours. And Russia's Black Sea port of Novorossiysk has temporarily suspended its oil exports after a Ukrainian missile and drone attack. Up to 2.2 million barrels of oil were stopped, the equivalent of 2% of the world's supply. It follows the strike. Ukraine is ramping up strikes on Russian oil refineries and has been doing so since August. And those are the headlines on Monocle Radio. And a very warm welcome to Charles Hecker, Russia analyst and author of the book Zero Sum about international business in Russia, its establishment and its ultimate departure post the Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Good morning, Charles.
Good morning, Emma.
We are very, very glad that you are here. And I think you are very, very glad that you are here. Not because you had any real problems getting into the studio this morning, for which we are very grateful that you're giving up your Saturday morning, but because your sleep told you otherwise. You had a very odd dream last night.
Yes, this is from the Department of Paging Dr. Freud. It's a great relief to be here in the studio on time and ready to go, because last night I had one of those absolute sort of classic stress dreams and dreamt that I was on my way into the Monocle studios for today's appearance and fell asleep on the tube. And of course, what happens when you fall asleep on any sort of mode of transportation? You wake up at the last station. I arrived at the last station literally minutes before we were scheduled to go on the air, had my phone with me and thought, oh, great, well, I'll do this all down the line. And then, of course, had enormous difficulty getting a reliable phone connection. And it was not a pleasant experience. I was very happy to wake up in the middle of it and realize it was all just a dream.
For which we are most grateful. And then we started talking as we were doing this about the exam dream, the broadcasting dream. In broadcasting, there is the bulletin dream where you are not in the studio. You could be. Ordinarily, I find myself in a phone box with or without clothes, with or without a script, and the script perhaps having gobbledygook on it and perhaps not. But everybody is always in a phone box, or everyone is stressed. It's those exam dreams. So I'm just looking them up now, and it says that they are, the internet tells me that they are distressing dreams that stem from unresolved stress, anxiety and overwhelming emotions in your waking life. So live on the radio, Charles, do you have unresolved stress, anxiety or overwhelmed emotions? Because you usually strike me as quite a level-headed gentleman.
Take your pick, Emma. It's the idea of these sort of stress dreams, and you're right, there are sort of classic versions, whether you're in broadcasting or in any other pursuit, and you know, sort of taking exams in courses that you never ever attended is one of them, and of course, you know, appearing in public without any clothes on it is another one.
All the time, with or without dreams. It's good to have you in the studio, and you've done all the hard work for everybody. If you're listening out there, Charles has read the papers for you, and you wanted to start with a story which we've just had in the headlines, but also this has dominated the headlines not just in the United Kingdom but globally, which is the mistake made by the British Broadcasting Association in splicing together two parts of Donald Trump's speech from the Capitol speech for January the 6th, where the meaning was essentially changed of what Trump said. The meaning that the BBC put together for a program called Panorama, which is an investigative journalist program, basically made it look like Donald Trump had incited people to go and be violent, which is not what he said. The BBC has apologised. Donald Trump said he was going to sue them. The BBC's response was, we made the mistake, but we're not going to pay you any compensation. Last night he came out and said, I'm going to sue them for $5 billion, which isn't great if you're sort of sitting around in the BBC newsroom wondering, where your next paycheck's going to come from. But you've been looking, what's been your view of what's going on here?
So you're absolutely right, Emma. I mean, this is everywhere. And this is also one of these stories that when you sort of lead a transatlantic lifestyle and have friends on both sides of the pond, your phone blows up at different times of the morning or the afternoon or the evening when one or the other coasts is asleep or awake. And the amount of conversation crossing the ocean on this subject is really, the traffic is quite heavy. And it is leading the Times today in big, fat, black headlines that says Trump says he'll sue BBC next week for up to $5 billion despite apology. And what President Trump appears to want to do here is, well, two things. He wants to teach the BBC a lesson and give it a very robust spanking. And the other thing is that President Trump suspects that the BBC is doing this all the time and has done it to him more than once. This splicing of quotations that you mentioned, Emma, he thinks that they've done it to him on more than one occasion. Trump believes that they've probably done it to Nigel Farage, and he hopes that the investigation that would be prompted by this lawsuit will unveil all sorts of nefarious practices inside Broadcasting House. I think that I remember when I was, a young journalist working in print media, we were forbidden from writing stories about threats to sue. And we're told that is not news and that you wait for a lawsuit to be filed. You wait for people to put their money where their mouth is before you write anything about it.
And as a result, this has now absolutely changed because now that Donald Trump has taken the narrative himself. And so that idea when people actually followed the letter of the law and what would or wouldn't be considered to be legally, fine. And also, as far as I can gather, the last time I checked defamation laws, every time you repeat the thing, you're actually committing a fresh defamation, a fresh libel. It does feel as if everything is now, all bets are off a little bit. And when you look at the way that Donald Trump has been taking action against the media, there is a long list of lawsuits, isn't there? Because I think he's taken on, the last time I looked was ABC, CNN, CBS, and now lining up for a fight with the BBC. Really bad news for the BBC, but not a massive surprise if you look at, his pattern of choosing who to sue in the last few months and years.
No, you're absolutely right. And the BBC should be taking some comfort in the fact that a lot of these threatened lawsuits have failed to materialize, number one. And number two, even when the suits are filed and the courtroom is engaged, they don't go anywhere. The bar for suing on behalf of a public figure is incredibly high in the United States. And we do know that the jurisdiction for this lawsuit will be in the United States rather than in the UK, even though this Panorama program was not broadcast in the United States. And public figures, and there is no public figure in the United States, more public than the president, excluding perhaps Kim Kardashian, but to have libeled or defamed a public figure in the United States, you have to show two things. You have to show that it was done with malicious intent, and that may be a bit sketchy on the side of the BBC, but you also have to show that there was genuine and sort of measurable harm done to the individual who has been allegedly defamed. Panorama was broadcast prior to Trump's reelection to a second term. He was reelected. It's a little bit difficult to show harm. And also just, he's a public figure and he's meant to sort of withstand, the slings and the arrows that journalists throw at him. My bet, if I were a betting man, I would say that this will either not proceed to the courtroom, or if it does, it'll get thrown out.
Well, there are different areas, aren't there? Because I think he's asked for several things, and one of them that he wanted acknowledgement that it was bad editing. So yes, the BBC has acknowledged that. The programme has been taken offline, so it can no longer be viewed. So the broadcast element is no longer a sort of a hot topic. Now he wants the $1 billion. Now, the issue that often is associated with defamation is that it has to have proved some damage and some harm. Now, this programme was broadcast before Donald Trump was elected president. So the general consensus is he was elected president after the programme went out.
Right.
One wonders where the damage is.
So there hasn't been, this is, one of my newer rules of thumb in how to interpret the bluster coming out of the White House these days is to sort of ignore the word salad and watch for the changes to the plumbing. And, this sort of, the anxiety coming out of D.C. in the direction of the BBC is word salad for the time being. And what he's making now is political capital. You mentioned that he had filed lawsuit genuinely against a number of U.S. broadcasters. What's different in that respect is that most of the broadcasters that Trump sued in the early days of his second term are companies that had regulatory matters before the Trump administration, in front of the Trump administration. And, this is a way of exerting pressure on them to cave in the hopes of a favorable regulatory outcome. That was particularly the case with CBS, which was being sold and had to be approved by federal regulators for that sale. The BBC is not in a similar situation and is not facing any sort of regulatory action in the United States. So the president's leverage against them is slightly reduced.
Where does this leave the BBC, though? Because when we look at the other broadcasters that he has taken legal action against, he sued ABC last year after claims made about alleged sexual offences. He had, I think, CBS had a lawsuit as well about, I think there was a Kamala Harris interview.
That's right.
That was a problem. And each outlet had the money to pay because it was a privately owned organisation. The difference here with the British Broadcasting Corporation is its funding, which is paid for by the taxpayer. If you are a British citizen, you have to pay your licence fee. And the money that Donald Trump would be going after would effectively be coming out of the British people's pockets. One wonders where this is now going to go in terms of the BBC's reputation, because although it is not hugely recognised in America, it sort of struggles somehow to get itself recognised as a big name. It is nonetheless respected as a British institution, and it has been on the ropes for quite a long time. A series of totally avoidable scandals have just brought it down. In the eyes of lots and lots of people, even people who do support it, are wondering why the BBC manages to do this thing to itself the whole time. So one wonders whether what I'm sort of generally getting at is, does Trump care that the fact that the money that he wants is not private money, it would be citizens' money?
That's right. And in fact, $5 billion is hardly sort of, change behind the sofa cushions. And the minimum amount of this lawsuit that he's threatening is $1 billion. So, there's quite a range there that will absolutely come from the license payer, from the British taxpayer and the British television audience. I'm sure that the president is oblivious to these sorts of details. That's something that's quite commonly known in the UK, of course, because we all pay it. But I don't think that most people understand those nuances in the US. Most people assume that the BBC is government owned, which sort of, I suppose, strictly speaking, the matter of debate. What I've had to do in sort of the transatlantic chit chat on this case is I've had to explain to friends and acquaintances and colleagues in the U.S. that piling on and bashing the BBC is a national sport in the UK. And while I think that this is, this does call into question some of the judgment in editing, it should also be noted, Emma, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I believe that Panorama is actually produced externally to the BBC and bought in to the broadcaster. So this is an externally produced show that the BBC buys and broadcasts. Although Panorama, it should be said, is a flagship BBC News show. But bashing the BBC is a national sport, both from the left and from the right. It is a cherished national and global institution and a significant source of British soft power. So you sort of want to see the BBC come out of this relatively unscathed. It has gone in a bit, damaged, but it is a central British institution.
And it does actually make every other broadcaster pull their socks up a little bit. I think we've all been trying to fail better every single day.
That's an interesting thing. I mean, I'm not a television analyst, but the television market here and the television market in the United States could not be more different. I mean, this is all, of course, under enormous change and transformation, including, because of the emergence of streaming services. But the BBC sort of blots out the sun in the UK the way no other broadcaster does in almost any other country. In the US, you've got a significant sort of diversity of national voices. And even though there are numerous television networks here in the UK, none of them has the scope, the reach, the breadth, or the financing of the BBC. And it's, on the one hand, quite a reassuring presence. It's also quite a distorting presence.
Let's move on to another story. What else have you spotted, Charles?
Well, if anybody's real estate hunting in the near future, I have a recommendation.
Where are we moving to, Charles?
That's right. So, well, first we're moving to Le Figaro. And because I really only have sort of 1 year of college French, no, sorry, it was 2 years of college French, I'm looking at Le Figaro in English and looking at a headline that says, "In the Maldives, floating cities designed to survive the onslaught of the sea." And so this is a story that tells us, and it's very beautifully illustrated, I have to say, because, of course, it is from the Maldives, which is a very beautiful part of the world. And what Le Figaro is telling us is that, of course, the Maldives is one of these sort of island nations that is genuinely threatened by rising sea levels. And that there are some forecasts that basically by the year 2100, so, in the distant but not enormously distant future, the Maldives could no longer exist as a result of rising sea levels. And so what the Maldives has done with what Le Figaro tells us is with a confidential budget, which I take to mean enormous.
Something yes, possibly a little bit higher than our pay grades.
Well, exactly. It's larger than your typical sort of house purchasing budget. But what they want to do in the Maldives, and are already doing, is creating the world's first floating city. And it says here, located about 15 minutes by boat from the actual city center. And the plan is for the city to have 7,000 houses, schools, hospitals, shops, and parks. And I find that concept quite interesting. You're in the middle of the Indian Ocean, but you need a park. And will house ultimately something between 20 to 30,000 people with a new place to live.
This thing is already happening, isn't it? The bit that I couldn't quite understand is that I had not picked up on this before. No one had picked up on this. And suddenly, literally within the next couple of years, this thing is going to be up and running. That's
right. This is sort of breaking news from Le Figaro. Yes, construction started about 2 years ago. And when you read a little bit more about this, you think that, okay, so this is beginning to actually make sense because behind this project, in addition to the Maldives government, are the Dutch.
That's the bit that absolutely tickled me, because you literally think, okay, if I'm going to bore a hole through a mountain, I ring Austria or Switzerland. Right. If I need my train sorting, I ring Switzerland. If I need to keep human beings dry, of course, we ring the Netherlands.
It all makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Because exactly, if you want to prevent water from getting into anywhere, you call the Dutch. And so I think this is quite a confidence-inspiring move. There is a Dutch developer behind this project. It has a completion date of 2027, which is very much in the visible future. So, we'll see. If there are meant to be 20 to 30,000 people living in this new project, there may just be room for a couple people from Monocle Radio.
Oh, you're suggesting we have a bit of an outpost?
it'll be a waterproof studio.
Indeed. I'll bring my flippers. Thank you for that, Charles. We'll be back with you in a minute. But first, though, last week, the actor Jamie Rose Monk joined Georgina Godwin at Midori House to talk to her about her extraordinary performance in The Woman at the Park Theatre, where she played 7 characters in just 95 minutes. Georgina asked Jamie how she crafted the very distinct characters and what it's like to be an actor in 2025.
I went to see a play a couple of weeks ago. It was called The Woman, and it was absolutely extraordinary. It was at the Park Theatre in Finsbury Park, and the performance of one particular actor really stood out. She is Jamie Rose Monk, and I liked it so much that I insisted that she come in to speak to me because, Jamie, this was an extraordinary performance in which you played how many?
Oh, that's really kind. 7 characters in 95 minutes.
Wow.
My fave. Yeah, it was really fun.
So tell me about that. How do you break this down? How do you keep those separate identities?
Yeah, the end goal that I hope for is that they're all really different, and that you hope that the audience at the bows is like, where's everyone else? That would be the sort of top compliment. So it is difficult because the goal is to keep them different, but I can't really work in that way of thinking about other characters when I'm working on one. So I don't like to go, oh, how can this voice be different from this voice? And I think that's a bit outside in. So the writing is so good, and the playwright Jane Upton is amazing. And I felt like her writing is like a playground for us. And I just tried to prep them all separately and hope that they were different, and just trust that they are different enough because the writing is different. But the prep was very separate for me. And then when we were in the runs, that's when I realised how difficult it was going to be to switch, because obviously when you rehearse, you're rehearsing in sections. But also I'm a bit of an overthinker, so the adrenaline of when I first come on, I do 4 in a row, and I think that was actually better for me personally than being off stage and worrying like, oh, is this going to work? Is this character going to work? So sometimes the adrenaline of doing them back to back was really helpful for each character. But I suppose it's the beginning that when we're in performance mode and you've done all the prep, the beginning of each scene is really important for my scene partner, Lizzie Watts, who's an incredible actress, but to give her the different energy that she needs for that new character. And the beginning is really key. And sometimes if you don't quite hit that, you feel like you're catching up for the whole scene. Yeah.
I mean, because it could so easily have been, you could so easily have done a sort of pastiche really of each. And you had so little to work with in terms of physical props or costume. The change might only be a pair of glasses or a ponytail or a lab coat or whatever it is. So tiny. And yet we weren't also seeing these huge kind of staggering changes of accent. What you were doing was so subtle, but made these people entirely different from each other.
Oh, that's really nice. It's really good to know. Yeah. Because the whole point of the play was that it was still in the creative process. So it's like a play within a play, and it's very meta. They didn't want to have, full new costume, full new. And also it would be really difficult because some of them were back to back, so the audience got to see us change, which I was kind of against when they said, oh, you're gonna take the jacket off on stage and you can put the new jacket on. I was a bit like, oh, can't I just go off? But actually in the end I did quite enjoy that, and the fact that the audience, it's quite part of the fun that the audience know, oh, it's the same actor. Obviously they know that anyway, but it's part of the fun, I suppose. Yeah.
Jamie, I've got to know about sort of being an actor in this day and age, because, I mean, one's always told, it was my first career and I gave up pretty soon as I realised how shockingly bad I was. And people always say, don't do it. You're, a lifetime of unemployment. You'll be an adolescent forever. You're doing it, and it looks like you're smashing it.
Well, yes, thank you. I feel like to do it, you need the main thing you need is support, I think. So if you've got a really strong support network, and I have, my family are so supportive of the career. My mum even more than me. When I have like times where I'm thinking, oh God, I don't know how long I have to wait for the next job. She's very like, don't give up. Come on. So I think that's been really helpful. And the people that you meet, the network of people is your biggest asset, because you get to know people and then they recommend you and you recommend them and you get to work with friends. And so it is difficult though when you're looking down a long stretch of not knowing what you're doing. But that's when you kind of lean on that village of people that you make, and there's always someone you can chat to about it, and you feel better afterwards. But it's difficult. And I had about 3 years when I left drama school where I didn't really work. And I did my own stuff and I did fringe stuff with friends. It took about 3 years before I felt like I'd cracked anything, which I could have easily come away from the career in those years. So I'm really thankful that I didn't. But yeah.
And what's next for you?
I am doing theatre, but it hasn't been announced yet. So I'm not allowed to say, which is really annoying. But yeah, it's going to be really fun. So I'm really excited for next year, yeah.
Well, I think you have the most astonishing future ahead of you.
Oh, that's so kind, thank you.
Monocle listeners, you heard it here first. Jamie Rosemonk is going to be a star.
Thank you.
And that was the future star, Jamie Rosemonk, talking to Georgina Godwin. Joining me still in the studio, Charles Hecker. Hello, Charles. Back again, listening to people who are obviously phenomenally talented and trying to get a break in the world of creation, theatre, film. But you picked up on a story yesterday, didn't you, in the New York Times, which is actually quite scary in terms of the future of Hollywood.
That's right. Listen to this headline. It says 25 movies, many stars, 0 hits. Hollywood falls to new lows. And what the New York Times tells us is that it has been a brutal 3 months for dramas and comedies. And what we learned by reading this actually quite lengthy story and sort of exploratory piece about what's happening in Hollywood these days is that if you take movies with absolutely bankable directors, absolutely immaculate scripts and adaptations, and then you put people in them like Margot Robbie, Colin Farrell, Dwayne Johnson, Julia Roberts, Channing Tatum, Jennifer Lopez, the list goes on and on and on. Massive Hollywood blockbuster names. All of these legitimate movie stars have made movies in the very, very recent past that have flopped. And what a flop is in Hollywood, apparently, is anything that makes less than $50 million in box office receipts. And that's when you begin to recover the investment that you make in these movies, because when you have big-name directors, when you have expensive scripts, and when you have expensive actors, you're investing tens of millions of dollars in a movie. Now, what Hollywood is saying is they're sort of acknowledging this trend, but what they're saying actually is that the way profits and income in movies are judged and what determines a sort of sales flop is evolving. And that is that movies are appearing in cinemas for shorter and shorter periods of time before they then are given over to streaming services where they can once again begin to recoup their investments. But that hasn't been happening so far. And, the only movies that appear to be succeeding are wildly escapist movies with sort of monsters and aliens and very scary looking kind of characters with teeth coming out of their eyes and what have you, as the New York Times illustrates in this story. So, yeah, it was a fascinating exploration of recent trends in the U.S. movie industry.
Well, one of the questions that's been asked is, haven't dramas and comedies been struggling for a while? And I think the thing that is different with what you've just raised there is the sheer volume of misfires, that it doesn't matter who is in your film. That the idea of the movie star is something which is now more generally being put into question. And what's the sort of the driving agenda behind this article in the New York Times is that it's been observed that this isn't a blip. This is actually this is being seen as a permanent state of affairs.
That's right. And I suppose it's a nod to a number of emerging other trends in Hollywood. And that is, of course, the sort of the movies that are driven by video games, the movies that are driven by animation characters, and the movies that are driven by proven franchises. How many Mission Impossible movies have there been? How many, other Tom Cruise movies have there been? How many Super Mario Brother movies have there been? And so it is quite possible that this is an indication that the very nature of filmed entertainment itself is changing. And I think one of the topics that triggered our selection of this story is that when it comes to sort of watching real people in the real world expressing different bits of reality on the silver screen, maybe we've had enough of that and really want just the escapism of fantasy.
And also, we have that thing now. We were talking before we were on air about the fact that we watch our films at home now. You said that the last time you went to the cinema was Barbenheimer, which was a couple of years ago now. And I was racking my brains. The last film I saw was a Jaws anniversary film, which was absolutely phenomenal. It was at the IMAX. It was the biggest, most fabulously funny and scary thing in equal measure. But there is little appetite there among, dare I say it, our sort of kind of people to actually go out and spend an evening out on something that you can put on Netflix in a couple of weeks and fall asleep regularly to.
That's right. And one of the reasons why the last time I was in the cinema was to do the Barbenheimer is because that was, in recent memory, the only moment that generated that kind of nearly global publicity. And Barbenheimer, of course, being a combination of the Barbie movie and the Oppenheimer movie, the Barbie movie being just sort of escapist fantasy of what happens to a world populated by Barbie dolls, and Oppenheimer, of course, an exploration of the birth of the atom bomb. And since then, I can't really think of anything. Well, maybe we should be talking about Wicked. I don't know. I haven't seen it, but that kind of agitprop in the public imagination is really quite rare.
So I think as we end this programme, the message to everyone out there is don't do a Charles and an Emma. Actually go to the cinema and save this thing. I know now what we're going to be doing for the rest of the afternoon. Now we're going to go and find, out of guilt, a cinema and go and watch a film.
Get your popcorn, get your chocolates, off you go.
Charles Hecker, thank you so much for joining me in the studio. And thanks also to our producer and studio engineer, Lily, and Monocle on Saturdays back at the same time next week. I'm Emma Nelson. Thank you so much for listening. Goodbye.